I arrived at my daughter's house on Christmas Day without informing her in advance, only to find her locked up in a basement looking malnourished. Her kids were playing on the compound, and her husband seemed to have left for work. Talking to her, I realized she had been sick for days but hadn't had medical care, so I rushed her to the hospital to be taken care of. Then I called her husband's office, and what happened next was rather the beginning of my calculated revenge. I'd tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Sam Smith from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I hadn't planned on surprising anyone that Christmas morning. Truth be told, I was simply tired of the quiet in my own home. Since my wife passed 3 years ago, the holidays had felt more like obligations than celebrations. But that year, something pulled me toward my daughter Lydia's house. I told myself I was just going to drop off some extra gifts for the kids, maybe share coffee and laughs, the way we used to when she still lived under my roof. I hadn't told her I was coming. It wasn't meant to be some grand entrance, just a father stopping by to see his family. But the second I pulled up to that house, my house, the one I had signed over as a wedding gift to Lydia and her husband James, I knew something was wrong. There was no wreath on the door, no lights twinkling through the windows. The yard was littered with toys, but the kind that looked like they'd been left out for days, weather-worn, carelessly scattered. The most jarring sight, though, was the children. My 2 grandkids, sitting quietly on the porch steps in their pajamas, each holding a piece of toast. Not a toy in hand, not a present in sight. "Where's your mom?" I asked, crouching beside them. The older one, Ava, didn't meet my eyes. "She's sleeping," she whispered. "Downstairs." My chest tightened. "And your dad?" "At work," she said. "On Christmas Day?" James worked in finance. His company shut down for the holidays. That was the first lie, but it wouldn't be the last. I knocked on the front door and waited. Nothing. I tried the handle. Locked. I rang the bell 3 times before walking around to the back. The sliding door was ajar, just enough for a cold draft to slip through. I stepped inside, calling out, "Lydia?" The living room was a mess. Not the kind of mess kids make on Christmas morning, but the kind born from neglect. Dishes stacked in the sink, trash bin overflowing. The tree, bare except for one crooked ornament and a dead string of lights. Something about it all made me feel like I was intruding on grief. I made my way through the kitchen, down the hallway, calling her name again. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the basement door. Shut. Bolted from the outside. At first, I stood frozen, my hand hovering above the latch like I was afraid of what I might find. What kind of person bolts someone inside a basement? The air felt suddenly too heavy, like the walls were pressing inward. I undid the latch and opened the door. Darkness. A smell, stale, damp, metallic. "Lydia." My voice echoed down the stairs. A weak moan answered. I took the steps 2 at a time, heart pounding so loud I could hear it over the creaking wood. At the bottom, it took a second for my eyes to adjust. Then I saw her. She was curled up on a mattress on the floor, wrapped in what looked like a thin throw blanket. Her face was gaunt, cheeks hollowed out in ways I didn't recognize. Skin pale. Eyes, when they opened, sunken and unfocused. Her lips were cracked. "Dad?" she said, voice barely a whisper. "Is that you?" I dropped to my knees beside her. "Jesus Christ, Lydia. What happened? What the hell is going on here?" She tried to sit up, but winced, clutching her side. I think I have an infection," she murmured. "I haven't eaten much." I couldn't get up the stairs. I stared at her in disbelief. "How long have you been down here?" "A few days. Maybe more." My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "Did James do this to you?" Her eyes fluttered shut. "He said I needed to cool off, that I was acting dramatic." The drive to the hospital was a blur. I wrapped her in my coat and carried her to the car like she was made of glass. She didn't protest, didn't ask where we were going, just leaned into me and let herself be taken. The emergency room doctor didn't ask many questions once they saw her vitals. Severe dehydration, bacterial infection, mild anemia. They hooked her to IVs and wheeled her off to a private room. I sat in the corner, watching her sleep, rage simmering under every breath. My daughter, the girl I had tucked in every night for 18 years, who used to giggle at bedtime stories and braid her mother's hair, was now skin and bones in a hospital bed because the man she married decided she was too dramatic. I didn't cry. Not yet. There wasn't room for it. Only plans. Quiet, ruthless, efficient plans. I had given them that house 5 years ago. A generous wedding gift, or so I thought at the time. But I had also learned, after watching too many marriages crumble around assets, to include a clause. A line in the deed that allowed me to retain ownership under specific conditions. One of them being abuse, neglect, or proven mistreatment. I never thought I'd need it. But that day, sitting beside my broken daughter, I thank God I had listened to my lawyer. By the time night fell, she was asleep again, for slowly dripping into her arm. I kissed her forehead and promised, "You don't have to go back there. Not ever again." And I meant it. Because the man who locked her in a basement was about to learn exactly what happens when you hurt the wrong man's child. I stayed the night in the hospital chair, drifting in and out of sleep under the dim hum of fluorescent lights and the steady beep of Lydia's monitor. It was the kind of sterile quiet that made your thoughts scream louder, and mine were all ugly. I kept staring at the four in her arm, at the bruises lining her wrist like some pathetic road map of her suffering. Every few hours a nurse came in to check on her vitals, and each time, I asked the same question: when can she talk to a social worker? Because this wasn't just a case of illness or negligence. This was abuse, and it wasn't subtle. James didn't leave her in that state by accident. He put her there, and he needed to be dealt with accordingly. When Lydia finally stirred the next morning, she looked at me like she expected to wake up somewhere else. "Dad?" she whispered, blinking against the morning light. Her voice was raspy, like sandpaper dragged across skin. "You're still here?" I took her hand gently. "Of course I'm still here. Where the hell else would I be?" Her eyes welled with tears, and she squeezed her lips together like she was trying to stop them from falling. I didn't think anyone would come. That broke something in me. A daughter shouldn't ever feel abandoned, not in sickness, not in fear, and certainly not in a house she was supposed to share with a man who vowed to protect her. "I'm here now," I said, "and I'm not going anywhere." She ate a little breakfast, just enough to give the nurse some relief, but her hands shook the whole time. Her skin still looked pale, almost translucent, and she winced when she sat up too fast. I didn't ask for the full story. I let her offer what she could, when she could. But when she started talking, she didn't stop. She told me about the other woman, how she found texts, late-night phone calls, gas receipts from out-of-town hotels. When she confronted James, he didn't deny it. He laughed, said she was lucky he still came home at all. The kids saw them argue, heard her cry. She tried to leave, packed a bag, took the car. But he took the keys and locked the doors. The next day, he told her she'd stay in the basement until she calmed down. "He brought me water," she said, "twice, and one granola bar. I think he wanted me to get scared enough to say sorry." My fists clenched at my sides. "He wanted you to beg." She nodded slowly. But I didn't. I didn't give him that. I looked at her, sick, fragile, and still holding on to her dignity like it was the last thing she owned. That was my girl, broken but unbowed. I wanted to tell her I was proud. I wanted to say so many things. But all that came out was, he'll never get the chance to try that again. After a while, I stepped outside to call Charles. He and I had been friends for over 2 decades, old college buddies turned business partners once upon a time. Charles was the CEO of the financial firm where James worked, and though I hated to mix personal matters with business, this wasn't just personal. It was moral. "I need a favor," I said, walking to the far end of the parking lot so no one could hear. "You have an employee named James Carrington." "Yeah, I know him," Charles replied, confused. "He married your daughter, right?" "That's the one. I need him out. Fired. Immediately." Charles hesitated. "Okay, why?" I didn't spare the details. I told him about the basement, about the neglect, about how I found Lydia on the verge of collapse while James was off God knows where. By the time I finished, Charles was silent. "Jesus," he muttered. "You're sure?" "I took her to the ER myself, Charles." "I don't need to be sure. I need you to do what's right." There was a pause. "Consider it done." I didn't go back inside right away. I stood out there for a long time, watching the sky shift from gray to blue, thinking about how far we had fallen. When Lydia told me she wanted to marry James, I hadn't been thrilled. He was always charming. Too charming, like someone playing a part he memorized too well. But she loved him, and I believed, foolishly, that love would be enough to protect her, that if he ever stepped out of line, she'd walk away. I didn't think he'd trap her. I didn't think she'd let herself be caged. But abuse doesn't always start with fists. Sometimes it's silence, isolation, the slow chipping away of someone's confidence until they believe they deserve less. And she, my strong, intelligent daughter, had believed it long enough to lose her own voice. That was on me too. I saw the signs and looked away. When I re-entered the hospital room, she was sitting up, sipping water slowly like it hurt to swallow. Her eyes looked clearer, more focused. "Where did you go?" she asked. I sat beside her again and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, something I hadn't done since she was little. "I made a few calls." "To who?" she asked, though I think she already knew. "To the man who signs James's paychecks." She blinked. "You got him fired?" "Not yet. But by this afternoon, he'll be back to square one." Her lips parted like she wanted to object, but then she closed them again. "Good," she whispered. Later that day, I spoke with my lawyer. The house, my house, had been legally transferred to Lydia and James as a wedding gift, but the special clause we wrote into the agreement gave me discretion to reclaim ownership if either party engaged in behavior that constituted abuse, endangerment, or financial exploitation. James had just met all three. I drafted a formal notice that same evening. He had 30 days to vacate the property, but I wouldn't wait that long. By nightfall, I had arranged for Lydia and the kids to move into my guest house, a modest but cozy 2-bedroom unit behind my main home. I had the locks on her old place changed by morning. A private security detail stood watch while James, now jobless and legally powerless, returned home to find himself locked out and served. I imagined the look on his face when he read the letter, when he realized the benefits he'd married into had all evaporated in less than 24 hours. The house, the job, the image of stability gone. And in their place stood me, a father whose patience had run out, a man ready to burn bridges just to keep his daughter warm. I remember the exact moment James called me. It was a Wednesday morning, just after 8 a.m., and I was sitting at the breakfast nook in my kitchen, watching Lydia pour cereal for her kids. She looked better, still pale, still fragile, but there was color in her cheeks and strength in her eyes that hadn't been there a week before. The kids were laughing again, pouring too much milk into their bowls and arguing over who got to sit closest to the window. I was soaking it all in when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first, but I answered anyway. "Hello." There was a pause. Then his voice, low, restrained, trying to sound composed. "Sir, it's James." The way he said "sir" made my skin crawl, like he was hoping we could reset the clock, like none of this had happened. "I just need a few minutes to explain." I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me so Lydia wouldn't hear. I let the silence hang for a moment before responding. "You don't have a few minutes, James. You're out of time." He exhaled hard. "Please, I didn't mean for any of this to happen." She just got paranoid. Started accusing me of things that weren't true. And I lost my temper. But I didn't hurt her. I swear to God, I never touched her. My jaw clenched. "You locked her in a basement. You starved her. You left your children unattended while your wife was too sick to stand up. If that's not hurting her, then what the hell would you call it?" He was quiet for a beat. "It wasn't like that. I just needed space." She was making things worse. My voice dropped, cold and final. "You needed space, so you put her in a basement? That's not space, James. That's a cell. And you're not a husband. You're a coward." He tried to pivot, of course. Started talking about the house, about how he had nowhere to go now, how it wasn't fair that he was being treated like a criminal when he hadn't even been arrested. "You know what that house meant to me," he said. "You gave it to us. You can't just take it back." I smiled grimly. "You clearly didn't read the fine print." I could practically hear the blood drain from his face as I explained the clause, the little section in the deed that gave me legal authority to reclaim the house in the event of abuse or neglect. My lawyer had been meticulous. And now, James had no job, no home, and no leg to stand on. "You played a long game, James," I said. "But you married into a family that plays longer." The call ended with him begging. Literally begging. His voice cracked, pleaded. He said he loved Lydia, that he was just under stress, that things got out of hand. Let me fix it, he said. Let me talk to her. But I didn't respond. I just ended the call and stood there on the porch, watching the wind pick up leaves from the yard, thinking about how little I'd known this man. I'd let him into my family, paid for the wedding, gifted the house, co-signed on their first SUV. I thought I was helping them build a life. But all I did was hand a snake the keys to the castle. Over the next few days, things escalated. James showed up at the old house, pounding on the front door, demanding to be let in. The security team intercepted him. He threatened legal action, threatened to go to the press. I didn't flinch. I had everything documented. Hospital reports, photographs, witness accounts, even the doctor's statement that Lydia was found in a state of medical neglect. If he wanted to take it public, I'd let him. Hell, I'd buy the front page. But he didn't go public. He didn't go to court. Because deep down he knew. He had nothing. Not 1 ounce of credibility. And worse, he'd underestimated the one person who had the power to ruin him. I knew people would talk. Friends from the church, neighbors, extended family members. They'd hear whispers and draw conclusions. Some might say I was cruel, that I overstepped, that I should have let Lydia and James work it out privately. But those people didn't see what I saw. They didn't stand at the bottom of that basement staircase and look into the eyes of a daughter who had nearly given up. They didn't hear her voice when she said, "I didn't think anyone would come." That sentence played in my head like a broken hymn, echoing in every quiet moment. It didn't matter what people thought. I wasn't in the business of being liked. I was in the business of protecting what's mine. 3 weeks after James lost everything, I received a letter from his parents. A carefully worded guilt trip stuffed inside a Christmas card. "We're sorry for the misunderstanding," it read. "James is going through a difficult time. He misses the children. He misses Lydia. Surely we can find a way to move forward with grace." Grace. That word made me laugh out loud. They wanted grace now, after raising a man who saw punishment as discipline and isolation as a solution. I didn't respond. I tossed the card into the fireplace and watched it curl into ash. Meanwhile, Lydia began to heal. Slowly. She still moved like her body didn't fully trust itself. Still flinched when the phone rang or when the kids cried too loudly. But she was coming back. I saw it in the way she tucked her hair behind her ear before leaving the house. In the way she started reading again, filling the house with paperbacks and dog-eared journals. I gave her space. I didn't press for details. But I stayed close. Close enough for her to know that she'd never be alone again. Not on my watch. And one day, while we were drinking coffee in the kitchen, she looked at me and said, "Thank you for not asking me to forgive him." I blinked. Why would I? She shrugged. People always do. When they hear the whole story, they start talking about redemption. About how every marriage has struggles. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't owe anyone a damn thing. Not grace. Not forgiveness. Not closure." Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. "Good," she said. "Because I don't have it to give." 3 weeks after Lydia moved into the guest house, I was sitting in my office, halfway through a vendor report, when my assistant buzzed in. "There's someone here asking to see you," she said, her voice low, uncertain. "He says his name is James Carrington." I didn't respond right away. I stared at the intercom like it might change its answer. "Should I tell him you're unavailable?" she asked. I stood slowly. "No. Send him in." I wanted to see what defeat looked like. I wanted to see it written across his face with all the weight of the decisions he'd made. If he had the audacity to walk into my building after what he'd done, then he could look me in the eye while I reminded him exactly who I was. When he stepped into my office, the first thing I noticed was how quickly his arrogance had withered. He used to dress sharp, tailored suits, polished shoes, a watch that gleamed like it had something to prove. But now, his blazer was wrinkled, the collar of his shirt limp, and his tie looked like it had been knotted in a parking lot mirror. He hadn't shaved. His eyes were puffy. The confident stride I remembered was gone, replaced by something smaller, a man who knew he had nothing left to bluff with. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, voice tight, like each word scraped his throat on the way out. I didn't stand. I didn't offer him a chair. I just watched him squirm. "I know things have gotten out of hand," he continued, hands clenched in front of him like he was begging God instead of me. I've made mistakes, but I'm asking, please, don't shut the door completely. My stare didn't break. What exactly are you asking for, James? He swallowed. A chance. To speak to Lydia. To explain. I held up a hand. You had your chance. For 5 years, you had it. And instead of loving her, you broke her. You chose someone else. Then when she caught you, you locked her in a damn basement. And now you want mercy. He shifted on his feet, face reddening. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't think that there'd be consequences. I finished for him. That's your problem, James. You treat people like insurance policies. But not this time. He tried to regain his footing, tried to sound reasonable. I know I messed up, but this, taking everything from me, it's not justice. It's vengeance. I laughed once, cold and sharp. You think this is vengeance? I stood now, slowly, walking around my desk until we were eye to eye. Vengeance would be dragging you through every courtroom in the state. Vengeance would be publishing every photo from that hospital room. Vengeance would be calling your parents, your friends, your church, and letting them hear Lydia's side of the story in her own words. He looked away. I haven't done that. Not yet. You should be on your knees thanking me for how restrained I've been. He said nothing for a long while. Just stood there, breathing shallow, like he was finally starting to feel the weight of what he'd done. I'm not the monster you think I am, he said softly. I was just angry. I lost control. My jaw tightened. You lost control the moment you decided to cheat on your wife. Everything after that was just you scrambling to cover your mess. You don't get to blame anger for deliberate cruelty. He looked up at me, and for a moment, I thought he was going to cry. But no tears came. Just more excuses. I loved her, he muttered. I still do. That was when I lost my temper. You don't love someone and starve them. You don't love someone and let your children watch her wither away. You don't love someone and then ask her father to clean up your disaster while you play victim. I stepped closer. Love is showing up. Every day, especially when it's hard. Love is protecting, listening, choosing again and again, even when you're tempted not to. You love the comfort she gave you. You love the image. But you never loved her. He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. Get out of my building. Don't show up here again. Don't contact Lydia. Don't come near the children. If I hear you're trying to sneak back into their lives, I'll bury you with the kind of paperwork that makes men vanish. His lips parted, desperate. Please, out, I said, my voice low but final. You're not welcome here. I watched him leave, that limp little suit hanging off his shoulders like it had finally accepted what he hadn't, that he was a man undone. A man who thought charm could fix rot. A man who had built his house of lies on a foundation I could bulldoze with a single phone call. And now, he was just a whisper in the halls of a life he no longer belonged to. That night, I told Lydia about the visit. Not every detail, just enough for her to know he'd tried one more time to plead his case. What did you say? She asked, eyes tired but curious. I sipped my coffee before answering. I told him he's not welcome, that you don't owe him anything, that the door's shut. She was quiet for a moment. Then, almost absently, she said, good. Just one word. But it told me everything. She didn't need to hear how broken he looked. She didn't need to know that he begged. She just needed to know that the story was still hers to close. And slowly, she began to rebuild. She started joining me at the office, at first just to shadow meetings and review files. But soon she was managing vendor calls, coordinating client updates, organizing payroll schedules. She was good, sharp, steady. She had a mind for operations and a spine made of something stronger than steel. I gave her an official title, operations manager, and a private office. She didn't ask for it. She earned it. And for the first time since her wedding day, I saw her stand tall without looking over her shoulder. People noticed. Staff, friends, even the kids' teachers commented on how different she seemed. Stronger, clearer, like someone who had come through fire and decided to stop apologizing for the burns. She laughed more now. She sang in the car again. Sometimes I caught her dancing while making dinner, a wooden spoon in one hand, a pot lid in the other. It wasn't the Lydia I remembered. It was someone newer, someone deeper, someone forged. And as for James, he called once more, left a voicemail this time. His voice was barely audible, slurred maybe, or just exhausted. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know how far gone I was until you took everything away. Tell her. Tell her I'm sorry. I didn't return the call. I didn't pass on the message. Lydia didn't need apologies. She needed peace. And finally, she was getting it. I remember the day Lydia signed her employment contract because she wore the same navy blue blouse she'd worn on her first job interview back when she was 22. It didn't quite fit the same. Her frame was thinner now, her posture more reserved. But I could tell she wore it on purpose, like she was reclaiming a part of herself. She looked over the paperwork carefully, reading every clause, every policy, before finally picking up the pen. "You sure this isn't just you being a soft dad?" she asked with a little smile that barely reached her eyes. "Absolutely not," I told her. "This is me hiring the most competent person in the room. Besides, it's about time someone here made better coffee than Jerome." She chuckled softly, but even that small sound felt like sunlight cracking through weeks of clouds. When she signed her name at the bottom of the page, I saw her shoulders relax, just a little. It was the first time I'd seen her commit to something that was hers, and hers alone, in a long time. The transition wasn't seamless, of course. She still carried her trauma like an invisible briefcase, never visible to clients, but always clutched tightly behind her smile. There were days when she'd show up early, laptop already open, fingers flying across the keyboard before most people even clocked in. And there were other days, quieter ones, when she'd sit at her desk staring at the screen, blinking back tears from memories she couldn't yet file away. I gave her space on those days. I didn't hover. I didn't ask. But I always made sure to leave a mug of hot tea on her desk, no questions asked. She never said thank you. She didn't have to. The way she'd place her hand on the mug and hold it there for a second before taking a sip, that was enough. The staff adjusted to her quickly. Some were curious, some cautious, especially those who had known James through company events or whispered office stories. But Lydia held her ground. She didn't flinch when his name came up in passing. She didn't correct rumors. She just worked. Efficient, organized, thorough. She treated the job like it was her lifeline. And in a way, I suppose it was. Her spreadsheets were immaculate. Her project timelines ran like clockwork. Clients who'd barely spoken to management before were now requesting meetings with her. I watched as she earned their respect without ever asking for it, just by showing up, day after day, with quiet determination and zero interest in being pitted. We had a small celebration when she closed her first major project. Nothing flashy, just cake in the break room and a few claps from the team. But I noticed the way she touched the back of her neck when we applauded, like she didn't quite know how to accept praise anymore. Trauma does that. It reshapes the way someone hears compliments, twisting them into suspicions or barbs. But that day, she let herself smile, full and real. "This is for me," she said afterward, looking at the framed project certificate on her desk. "Not for anyone else. Not to prove anything. Just for me." And I believed her. Because something in her eyes had changed. Not healed, maybe, but hardened. Like tempered glass. Cracked once, but stronger now. Outside of work, she was rebuilding, too. The kids had adjusted faster than I expected. They were young enough to adapt, but old enough to remember. They asked about James at first, mostly quiet questions, whispered before bedtime or during car rides. "Will Daddy be back? Is Mommy mad at Daddy?" I never lied. But I softened the truth. "Mommy is protecting herself," I said once. "And protecting you too. That's what brave people do." Lydia handled those conversations better than I ever could have. She didn't villainize James, but she didn't protect him either. "He made some really bad choices," she told Ava one night. "And when people do that, they don't always get to stay." That was it. Simple. Honest. Final. Eventually, the kids stopped asking. One evening, I came home to find Lydia in the kitchen, the radio playing some old R&B tune while she danced around in her socks, stirring pasta and singing off-key. The kids were at the table coloring, and for a second, I stood in the doorway and just watched. She looked light. Not carefree. Not yet, but light enough to float a little. When she noticed me, she blushed. "Caught me," she said, twirling the wooden spoon like it was a mic. "You cook now?" I teased. "Only when I want the kids to pretend they like vegetables." She grinned. It was so simple, so normal. But after everything we'd been through, It felt like watching someone walk for the first time after months in a cast. Every step, no matter how small, felt like a miracle. James still tried, now and then, to claw his way back. A text once, just a single word, sorry. An email a week later with a subject line that read, for the kids. I intercepted every one. Changed Lydia's number. Filtered her inbox. She didn't ask questions. Didn't demand to see the messages. She trusted me to keep the gate, and I did. Because I knew how tempting it could be to glance backward, to reread old wounds and wonder if maybe, just maybe, they'd healed into something worth salvaging. But they hadn't. Some wounds are meant to scar, not reopen. 3 months into her new role, Lydia was nominated for a regional leadership award. It was small, just a recognition badge and an invitation to a networking gala, but it mattered. She almost didn't go. I don't belong in those rooms, she told me, fussing with her dress in the mirror, lips pressed thin. Those women have real accomplishments. I'm just surviving. I walked into the room and handed her a pair of earrings, her mother's. Simple pearls. Nothing fancy. You're not just surviving, I said. You're building. There's a difference. She stared at her reflection for a moment, then nodded. Okay, I'll go, but you're walking in with me. And I did. We walked into that room like we belonged there, because we did. When they announced her name during the dinner, the applause was polite at first, then stronger. And when she stepped up to the podium to say a few words, I saw the tremble in her hands, the deep breath she took before speaking. I used to think strength meant keeping quiet, she began. Enduring things. Pushing through. But I've learned that real strength is in boundaries. In saying no. In choosing yourself even when it feels like the world wants you to choose pain. So thank you for recognizing not just my work, but my journey. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Mine included. That night, as I watched her tuck the kids into bed and lay out her outfit for the next day, I realized something that both comforted and devastated me. She was never going back to the woman she was before James. That version of her was gone. But what remained, what had risen from the ashes, was someone even stronger, wiser, sharper. She still had shadows under her eyes, and she still flinched at loud voices sometimes. But she was standing, and every day, she stood a little taller. It was early spring when the letter came, tucked inside an unmarked envelope and dropped through the slot like a whisper from the past. I found it on a Sunday morning, lying among bills and flyers, the handwriting instantly recognizable, stiff, angular, the same as it had been on their wedding invitations years ago. For a long time, I didn't open it. I set it on the counter and went about my morning routine, poured coffee, fed the dog, and tried to convince myself it was just another one of James's desperate attempts to claw back into relevance. But the longer it sat there, the heavier it felt, like it was absorbing the weight of everything we'd endured. Eventually, I gave in. I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the letter. It was written in shaky script, as if his hand couldn't decide whether it wanted to apologize or defend itself. He wrote about losing everything, his job, his friends, his reputation. He said he understood now, that he'd been selfish, reckless, blind. He said he was drinking too much, sleeping too little, and that he woke up every morning wishing for another chance. And then, near the end, the words that sealed it all for me. Tell Lydia I still love her. I sat there for a long while after reading, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. Love. The word felt cheap now, hollow from overuse and misuse. What did love mean to a man who could walk past his starving wife in a locked basement and still sleep at night? What did it mean to someone who had taken something sacred and turned it into a transaction? I thought about Lydia, how far she'd come, the light in her eyes, the steadiness in her voice, the small, ordinary joys she'd reclaimed, and I knew this letter would undo her if she saw it. It would drag her backward into the mire she'd fought so hard to escape. So I did what any father would do. I protected her. I folded the letter neatly, struck a match, and fed it to the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished into embers. I watched until it was gone completely. No trace left. Just smoke rising like an exorcism of what once was. That evening, Lydia came by for dinner with the kids. It had become our weekly ritual, Sunday dinner, no business talk, no heavy topics, just laughter, food, and the familiar rhythm of family trying to feel normal again. She brought dessert this time, a homemade apple crumble that filled the house with cinnamon and sugar. The kids ran through the hallway, chasing each other with toy cars, their laughter bouncing off the walls. Lydia set the pan on the counter and smiled at me. "You look like you've been thinking too much," she said, sliding a fork into my hand. "You'd think retirement was supposed to be relaxing." I laughed softly. "Old habits die hard." She raised an eyebrow. "You mean worrying?" I shrugged. "Maybe." I didn't tell her about the letter. Not because I believed in keeping secrets, but because some things deserved to burn quietly without ceremony. Over dinner, we talked about the kids' school projects, about a new supplier she was considering for work, about the neighbor's dog that wouldn't stop barking. The normalcy of it all was a kind of balm. And then, somewhere between dessert and dishes, Lydia looked up at me with a softness I hadn't seen in years. "You know," she said, "I used to think I'd never feel safe again. Not just safe from him, but safe in myself. Like maybe I'd lost the ability to trust my own choices." I leaned forward, elbows on the table. "And now?" She smiled faintly, tracing a finger along the rim of her glass. "Now I do. I trust myself. I don't need anyone to tell me I'm strong. I just know it." I swallowed hard, the kind of pride that sits somewhere between joy and grief swelling in my chest. "You earned that," I said quietly. "Every bit of it." Later that night, after she tucked the kids into bed and lingered by the doorway, she asked something I wasn't expecting. "Do you ever regret getting involved?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean firing him, taking back the house, ending his career. Some people would have said that wasn't your place." I studied her for a long moment before answering. "You were locked in a basement, Lydia. If that wasn't my place, then I don't know what is." She nodded slowly, tears glinting at the edges of her lashes. "I know. I just wonder if part of me should have fought him myself. Like maybe I hid behind you." I shook my head. "You didn't hide. You survived. And surviving is its own kind of fight." That seemed to settle something in her. She hugged me tight before leaving, her scent a faint mix of apple and vanilla, the same perfume she used to borrow from her mother's dresser when she was 16. When the door closed behind her, I sat in the quiet house and finally let myself cry. In the months that followed, James faded into rumor. Some said he'd left town, others that he was working odd jobs somewhere 2 states over. I didn't care to know. His absence was a blessing. Lydia thrived. Her company division exceeded its targets, and she was promoted again by mid-year. She even started volunteering at a local women's shelter, mentoring others who were still finding their footing after abuse. Watching her in those moments, steady, confident, patient, was like seeing the final piece of a long, painful puzzle click into place. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was leading. And though I'd played a part in rescuing her, I understood now that she had saved herself too. Every once in a while, I'd think back to that Christmas morning, to the silence in that house and the basement door bolted from the outside. I could still hear the faint echo of her voice when she said, "I didn't think anyone would come." Those words haunted me, shaped me. They made me promise myself that no one I loved would ever feel abandoned again. And maybe that's why I never regretted what I did to James. Because justice, to me, wasn't about fairness. It was about protection. It was about making sure the people who broke my family would never get another chance to do it again. The next Christmas, Lydia hosted dinner at her new house, a place she bought entirely on her own. No gifts, no strings. It was modest but beautiful, filled with light and laughter. She greeted guests with confidence, poured wine like a hostess born for the role, and even toasted to new beginnings. "To the peace we build ourselves," she said, glass raised, eyes shimmering under the warm glow of the tree lights. I looked at her then, the same daughter I'd once carried out of darkness, and felt something inside me settle. She had come full circle. She didn't just reclaim her life, she reinvented it. As the night wound down, she walked me to my car, the air cold and crisp around us. "You know," she said, "I never told you this, but when I was in that basement, I thought about Mom. I kept wondering if she'd be disappointed in me for staying as long as I did." I reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Your mother would be proud," I said. "Not because you stayed, but because you left. Because you fought." Because you found your way home again. She smiled then, that same soft, steady smile that once seemed impossible. I think she would be. When I drove away that night, the sight of her house in the rearview mirror, the golden windows glowing against the dark, felt like closure. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need to think about James or what he'd lost. The truth was, he'd already destroyed himself. My only task had ever been to make sure he couldn't destroy her too. And now, seeing Lydia standing there in the doorway, arms crossed, laughter spilling from inside, I knew I'd done exactly that. When family and justice collide, where should the line be drawn? I stood by my choice to strip a man of everything he used to hurt my daughter, but not everyone would agree. What would you have done in my place? Was it revenge, or was it protection? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and tell me how far you'd go to keep your family safe. If this story moved you, make sure to like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful real-life family dramas. See you soon in the next story.